Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero. Our guest today is Thomas Pecora. He spent 24 years working in, leading, and training the protective force in the CIA. That means he kept dignitaries, heads of state, agents, assets, you name it, safe in all of the hottest places in the world. All of them. If you can think of a spooky place that was a terrorist hotbed in the last quarter century, Tom was there. And he was there with the specific task of getting folks in, through, and out of there in one piece. He's now the author of the book Guardian, Life in the Crosshairs of the CIA's War on Terror, which is an historical memoir of his time in the protective operations. Tom is a badass of the highest caliber. He's got fascinating insights and lots of amazing stories, and you should read this book. It'll entertain you. It'll fascinate you. It's available at his website, thomas-pecora.com, and we will put a link in the show notes. Speaking of badasses, we are promoting our favorite cause, Save the Brave. Check them out at savethebrave.org. And the event that we're promoting is the Simon R. Litke Memorial Golf Tournament at the Temecula Creek Inn Golf Course on October 4th. Save the Brave is a certified 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to helping veterans cope with post-traumatic stress. You can register for the tournament at savethebrave.org/event. And that link will be on our website too. We also urge you to help us by rating and reviewing the Break It Down show, especially if you like us. You can do that on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to find podcasts like ours. Do that for us, and we will keep getting you great guests. Like our special guest today, we know you're going to love him. Here's Thomas Pecora.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This
East.
is Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hi, my name is Tom Pecora. I'm the author of a book called Guardian, Life in the Crosshairs of the CIA's War on Terror. It's a historical memoir of my 24 years in the CIA as a security officer protecting agency personnel in the war zones. And I'm here on the Break It Down show.
And now, the Break It Down show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yeah, we've got Tom on the show and co-hosting with us, my good friend Jason Piccolo, who is fantastic. We swap guests all the time. And when I saw Tom's name, I looked up and said, wait, not the coach, the CIA guy? Yes, of course. And I want the coach too, but in this case, we're talking to Tom, who worked for the CIA. And actually, you won the second highest award in the CIA. That's pretty damn good, man.
Yeah, the award is called the Intelligence Star, and the alternate version is the star that they chip into the wall if you perish during the act. So I'm happy to get the one where I'm alive.
Yeah, me too. And I don't know if you realize this, but I helped Mark Valley build a live drop into a podcast. So Mark and I are good friends.
Oh, he's a great guy. I really enjoyed being on his show.
Yeah, Mark loves the spy game more than us spies. It's funny how much he's just so passionate about it and just wants to learn more about it. And, you know, he worked right there by Checkpoint Charlie, and it's just neat to hear him talk about it. And in part, his inspiration to do live drop was partly my inspiration to do what I call spy versus spy episodes, where I bring folks like us who work in the work and we talk about the actual knit and grit of what we do. And I'm going to consider you a spy. Maybe you don't because you worked on the security side, but the God's honest truth is you're trying not to be seen so you don't get shot and move fast. And guess what? That's what I try to do too.
Yeah, I actually did work on the operational side. I was detailed over and I was hunting terrorists and providing support to the case officers when they were operating, doing pretty much about 30% to 70% of their work in terms of the clandestine activities, like getting cars and setting up surveillance detection routes and things like that, supporting them so they could do their operations more efficiently.
I love talking about surveillance because it's such a mystifying part of the job that people don't talk about. And if you're comfortable talking about it, I'd like to dig in a little bit because there's surveillance, there's counter surveillance, and get this, everybody. There's people that counter the counter surveillance. The people that do surveillance, this is another odd fact that I didn't learn until decades into my career, are called surveillance, like TS, surveillance. And it's interesting because I've done private surveillance work And I go to ask, like, well, what are we trying to do? Like, are we just following this guy? If they try to lose us, are we supposed to, expose ourselves to keep up? Because you know how hard it is to follow someone. It's
Not like Hollywood.
This is my story, and then I'm going to shut up and let you guys talk about surveillance for a minute. So we were leaving an airport on a job following some people.
Hey, this is Pete. Real quick, I just want to let you guys know we are proud to announce our official support of Save the Brave, a certified nonprofit 501c3 with a charter of helping veterans with post-traumatic stress. Here's how you can help. Go to SaveTheBrave.com, click on the link on the website, and my recommendation is this. Subscribe. Give them $20 a month. You've got subscriptions that you can turn off right now that you're not using that are $20 a month. Swap that out. Get involved. Let's help these folks out.
So we were leaving an airport on a job following some people, okay? And there's at least, $30,000 a day worth of humans, cars, and everything else following some people. And we leave the airport, and the first car, once we get out of the walking part of the surveillance, so literally like the third person who has the person that we're following drives out of the airport, and we're next. And there's a rise that they go over, and we're on the wrong side of the rise, and he hands off, and it's a white car, and there's two white cars. We're like, okay, car on the left, let's go. And within an instant, the rabbit was gone.
There it is. Not like Hollywood.
No.
No.
It sounds like my dope days when I used to work high intensity drug trafficking down in San Diego, trying to track out people from there all over the country. So you guys may have done that overseas stuff, but it's not quite that easy in the domestic world as well.
Oh, I imagine. The tie-ins between surveillance in terms of working against other spies and then working against terrorism. In the protection world, one of the big events that changed the way we looked at protection had to do with surveillance. There was an event back in the old days, in the 70s and 80s, when there were the terrorists in Europe were going after people, and they found out with an attack on a banker named Herrhausen that even though he had the best armored car and a really good protection detail, they still killed him. And what was discovered by examining that attack is that the surveillance was the weak point in the terrorist methodology. And from that moment on, we started looking at protection with a very strong focus on finding the surveillance and then working backwards.
Yeah. How does one counter surveillance then? How do you do that?
Well, you mentioned the terminology and different units use different things. At the CIA, we developed an actual counter surveillance unit that worked on the director's protection detail. And I was part of that original unit. And what we were doing is you have to understand the attack cycle of the terrorist. And it's anywhere between 7 and 9 steps, depending on who you're talking to. But one of the critical parts is before they can attack you, they have to find out information about you. And in most cases, at some point, they're going to have to be within visual range. And at that point, what you're looking for is the signature of a surveillant. And if you're, for example, on the detail, the protection detail and the surveillance are watching you, you're being surveilled. So you are trying to recognize surveillance. If you are the next level back, in other words, you're looking for the surveillance on your protectee, you are counter surveillance.
Yes.
So there's multiple levels. And so you've got this who's watching who and looking at who's back. And it becomes difficult because the playing field only allows you certain observation points. And if you're not careful, you're going to end up in one of the observation points sitting next to the bad guy.
Yes.
And that won't work.
And that's one thing you learn with surveillance is there's just not enough room. When you have layer upon layer of the circle, each wave of the circle. So yeah, man. So you and I talked a little bit before the show. We talked a bit before. Now you keep jumping around all over the world, and so now you got to pick up different surveillance tactics, different worlds. What is that like?
Oh, that's challenging. And when I would move to a new location, the first thing I would have to do is learn the area, and that's 8 hours a day or more for the first week and a half to learn the routes, to learn the areas that people frequent that we're protecting. And then we're also having to pick up on the culture and the dress and the way they operate their cars, you're picking up all the facts that you're going to need so that you can blend in. And you're also looking for your perch, your places where you can observe the areas where the most likely surveillance point's going to be. For example, if there's a park across the street from one of our agency persons' houses, we can't be in that park with them. That's where the bad guys are going to be. We're going to have to be in a location where we can observe likely spots in the park, but in areas where they won't necessarily be looking for us to watch them. So we want to look at the back of their neck. That's kind of the methodology.
Yeah, it's a funny game of who's going to sit where, and then like you're going to do this for an unknown number of hours. And you're going to sit there and you have to provision for going to the bathroom, eating. And sometimes you work in teams if you're afforded that luxury. Sometimes you're not, though. And so wherever your perch is also part sustainability. Right, Tom?
Yes.
You can't just stand on the corner by the train station with the newspaper all day. At some point, that doesn't work.
No, at some point, you got to get on the train.
Right, yes. Yeah.
You've got to factor in your activities so that they don't give away the fact that you're watching. For example, when your protectee leaves, you can't wait 5 minutes and then leave too, because
right.
That's correlation. You're correlating. So you've got to factor in how are you going to go to the bathroom and where you're going to eat and how you're going to switch off with your teammates. How do you do your communication, especially in places where they don't allow radios? So It gets very complicated. It's a real challenge.
Not to be graphic, but planning your bathroom break. That's a big one. Yeah. It's called the detergent bottles. I found to be the best, if you guys want to know.
So one of the things that's funny about surveillance is as you're going around, they have a thing, at least in the military, we call it the heat stake. And your heat states is how hot you are in terms of like how long you've been in an area. Have you changed your outfit and that kind of thing? And so we would call that a polish. And so you polish, and all these things aren't classified. These things are known. What happens when you do training in DC? DC's hot and muggy. You're running around. You're changing clothes in a van. And it's in no way clandestine. It's just a circus of people trying to go down one-way streets and the rabbit walking across the mall, and you're just dripping with sweat, and you're taking, you would take sweaty clothes off and put them onto a sweaty body, and it's horrible. So how does that compare with, I always felt like the op tempo when we trained in DC was entirely too high for what reality was. How does that actually compare? Like in real life, when you're sitting there, because I know, like in real life, when I've done actual surveillance, 90% of the time you're just sitting there waiting for something to happen, or you're driving in a line of cars, with no responsibility other than to be a car in line and move up in time, which could be hours on the same road.
Hurry up and wait.
Yeah.
One story that I tell in my book is about a surveillance operation when I was in Khartoum. And Khartoum is a desert place, and temperatures get up to 135 degrees. And I ended up on the rooftop of a building surveilling some bad guys in a restaurant. And luckily I was in this, they had built a little, like a little closet, and it had an air conditioner, but you could imagine how it wasn't keeping up with the heat. And so I was just one dripping mess. And to keep my concentration on this small lens that I was looking through, which was on the back end of a 2-foot long, a gigantic extended telephoto lens. So I'm watching and with one eye and trying to keep concentration. And I found that what I ended up doing was eating nasty gummy bear. Actually, they were called gummy worms, just to keep the sugar level up high enough so that I could keep in the job. It was miserable. I did that for a couple of weeks straight.
Well, you're basically a sniper. A lot of people don't realize that you're just gathering intelligence. You're looking for a split second to gather it, and it, to make sure your package is good. So, you're essentially sitting there like a sniper. So, it's a tough job, man.
Yeah.
No glory there.
Yeah.
Now, and when people say, they only, and I've had a lot of contact with Secret Service. I've done protection details, done surveillance. And when you talk about protection, it's not just protection. It's the whole thing. You're basically doing intelligence gathering. you're doing protection, you're doing a million different things. You're basically, like you said, doing case officer stuff. You're gathering.
You're absolutely right.
That if your subject's day is a 12-hour day, you've got a 16-hour day. You know, because you're starting before them, you're waiting on them to get up. And like you said, Tom, when they leave, you're like, well, I've got a little while to sit here still.
That's it.
Then you have to write reports.
Yeah, nothing's done until the paperwork's finished.
Right.
Yeah, the little known write up the report, and oh, by the way, that's got to get uploaded, and you know your supervisor is going to talk to you, and you got mandatory training and mandatory meetings. So yeah, your days and weeks turned into like a blur. I'm imagine.
Yeah, I will say I felt for the case officers because they did do a lot more paperwork. We used to say that if you made a TV program about I was with the counterterrorism unit. The counterterrorism unit would be 50 minutes of action and 10 minutes of writing, and the case officer would be 10 minutes of action and 50 minutes of writing. So totally different jobs. I enjoyed being on the street a lot more than having to work in the office.
And then the other thing that happens that's crazy is if the subject of the surveillance is aware or has strong personal counter surveillance techniques, I'm trying to describe this carefully, that also is a nightmare. You know, like let's say that I'm the person everybody's following and I am walking in and out of stores. I'm doing all of the things. I'm having conversations with 10 different people every hour.
Oh.
Everybody following me is losing their minds. You can probably, if you paid attention, you could probably watch behind me and watch the groans and the misery as I meet the 15th person in an hour. Every single person, because somebody you have to kind of peel off and account for in some way or get a picture of or to a timestamp and describe this. Oh my God. It's just driving me. It's driving me crazy thinking about what I would do if I knew I was being followed.
Absolutely. And there's a strange phenomenon that happens when you sit and watch an area long enough. You see some very strange stuff that normally you wouldn't see because you're about your business and you're moving along and you've got your mind on other things. And when you see these strange things, you gotta figure out what they are.
Yeah.
And so some investigation has to go into it. And so often, in most cases, it's just some weird thing happening in the environment that has nothing to do with your protectee. But it still has to be run down. And sometimes you get some pretty strange stories. You find out people are out on their husbands, or people are involved in drug deals, or something strange is going on in the neighborhood, but it has nothing to do with your protectee.
Yeah, that's true. The other funny thing is people get lost. People forget things. They double back because, whatever, or they get inspired at the last second because they want fucking ice cream. And you know how we are. We're all like, why does he want ice cream? What's going on? No, he just wants a piece of ice cream,
Is it a drop? What's going on?
Someone stay at the Circle K and sweep that place. Yeah.
Who's got the trash?
Trash detail.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. Well, the other thing I wanted to bring up, too, was the teamwork, too. You're talking solo operation and how you do it. But if you don't have the right team, man, you're kind of SOL. So you have to make sure they're all up to speed as well.
Yes, you don't always get to choose the quality of your teammates. We, I will leave out more pertinent information, but we had somebody that had a nasty habit of forgetting where they left the rental car.
Oh, man.
Multiple times we had to end up scouring the city to try to find his rental car. That can really affect your performance.
I have a funny surveillance story, and I'm going to tell it. So I was doing a private surveillance job, just like $50 an hour, no big deal. You're going to sit there all night, and we have this guy, and we just don't want him to flee the country. It was a court case, right? Nothing classified. And so he lived in a subdivision that had one way in, one way out. Everybody's like a surveillance expert. Everybody's like, I know how to do surveillance. It's all a bunch of cocksure people. So all these guys are talking about where they were going to be, and they all wanted to be on the subject. And I'm like, that's fantastic. All of you guys, go wherever you want to go. Bunch up all over him. I'm going to go out of the subdivision and to the left down a quarter mile, because if he goes left, he'll never know I'm following him. So I just posted up in a neighborhood and started sleeping. because there's nothing else.
Conserving your energy.
Yeah, they were all so fired up. Turns out that my buddy works for the 911 response part of the police department in the area we were in. So we were already called in to say we were going to be in the area, which is what you do for law enforcement. Say, hey, we're doing some surveillance, blah, blah, blah. They don't care as long as they know about it. But I let him know. I'm like, hey, I'm in your area and I'm doing surveillance. It's like, are you in that black truck? And I'm like, yeah, I'm in a black truck. It's like, someone already called and reported you. And I'm like, yeah, I don't care about that. I'm nowhere near my subject. Of course, they called because there's a dude sitting in a neighborhood in his car, for more than 20 minutes, in front of someone's. Yeah, of course. And he's like, cool. Well, I'm going to bring you some tacos. And I'm like, sweet. I love tacos. And I'm like, hey, by the way, my really good friend and a guy we grew up with, so he knows him too. My really good friend, Jeff, is sitting on the subject's house. And he's like, well, where is the house? And I said, oh, it's this address at this place. He's like, my best friend just moved in right next door. I swear to God, I was at his house yesterday unpacking boxes. And I'm like, take Jeff tacos right there while he's sitting on the subject. And so Jeff has no idea I'm talking to my buddy Bryan. And so Bryan comes over, hangs out with me. We have some tacos. He gets out and leaves and goes. He walks right up to Jeff's car, knocks on the windows, hands him a box of tacos. And Jeff is just like, what the fuck? Because he hasn't seen this guy in 20 years. This guy just brought me tacos. That's Brian Whitney. And then he walks towards the subject house, cuts across his grass, and goes into his friend's house. How great is that?
Blew his mind.
Yeah, totally. What kind of funny stories? You must have something good like that.
Oh, the crazy situations I end up in, because a lot of times I had to work solo and I'd be in some really bad places by myself. I remember one time we were waiting on a meeting in a nightclubby area of Manila. And unfortunately, traffic was so bad back then. Traffic jams would cause you to be 2-3 hours late. So trying to find a parking spot, you'd have to place your car maybe 6 hours in advance. And I ended up stuck in this car with no air con running, just a crack in the window. It ended up with a 3-hour while I watched everybody going by me partying while I just sweat a pool on that car seat. This is so much fun. The boredom level was off the charts. My dad had a saying for that. He said, success is the management of boredom.
Yeah.
And in surveillance work, that's the mantra.
I'm reading your book now. I'm just picturing you wrestling, college, and then picturing you later on, like sweating your ass off in a closet somewhere. And I'm like, did you think your career would end up there?
Never in a million years. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Every new job brought a whole new world and new interesting people. That part I've enjoyed. I've worked with a lot of different foreign groups and, of course, lots of people within the U.S. government. And that's been one of the highlights, actually, meeting all these people and having good times.
Yeah, let's pay the bills a little bit here. Everybody, this is Tom Pecora. You got to get his book. It's so awesome. It's called Guardian, Life in the Crosshairs of the CIA War on Terror.
Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here. And if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
Yeah, let's pay the bills a little bit here. Everybody, this is Tom Pecora. You got to get his book. It's so awesome. It's called Guardian, Life in the Crosshairs of the CIA War on Terror. And what Tom is describing is just like all of the work that goes into doing the work of a CIA team that's trying to find Al-Qaeda or whatever it's going to be. Like, it's not just constantly a pursuit of the bad guy. It's a lot of standing around, sweating your ass off in a car because you can't run the engine any longer. You're going to run out of gas. All these crazy things that go into trying to manage these things. Oh, and by the way, he's been in, what, Tom, over 20 countries, I would guess?
For 50.
50 countries. So your tolerance for ambiguity must be peaked out at the very top. Like, you can tolerate a lot of uncertainty.
To the point where I was ready to go to any country at any moment and get in the car and spend the next week learning the roads. And I would know it better than most of the locals. And it's just that I could operate. Yeah, it was always a challenge. Always a challenge. But fun. I mean, I love traveling, and I like to see the different cultures. And I've met some really nice people. I've been to some places I'd never want to go again. From Mad Max Somalia to crazy times in Haiti to absolutely great times in Bolivia. And it's the people who made the difference.
Yeah.
That's one thing I got to give props to the book too, because the book is broken down into like timeline. So it's very easy to follow you. So you're not just jumping all over the world and everything. So it's easy to track your life as you're going and just seeing the things that you had to go to get into the agency. It really is an unprecedented book because you've heard all the books about spy versus spy. You've read all the case officer books, but this is just a different precedent. That's what I liked about it.
It took me 3 years to get through the publication review board, and I won't go into the excruciating details that took. It was a battle royal, but I was able to get details that have never really been talked about. The protection unit that was clandestine up until basically the Benghazi event in 2012, when the Annex team saved the lives of the State Department personnel. So I got a chance to I was kind of the unit historian, and I got a chance to actually document for the public the story of a unit that's been highly successful, but totally clandestine from basically 1990 all the way up until 2012.
So when you take this body of work and you try to organize it, obviously, yeah, getting it by all of the people that have to approve the tactics and techniques and stories exposed. But what about the timeline thing? That's interesting. Oh, and I should say, by the way, for sure, check out Mark Valley's episode of Live Drop with Tom and also Jason Piccolo's episode. We're not going to cover a lot of the background stuff because these guys have done such a great job already in that. That's why we're sort of focusing on the tradecraft end of it. But the actual writing of the book, to describe, you can go linear, but I don't know if that serves what you're trying to do because there's so much plurality in all of these things. So how did you come up with the structure?
Well, it kind of just grew when I started to hash out certain key events. I wanted to match them to major terrorist events that I was working, to interesting things that were going on in the world. And it just seemed to come together. And that's why I say it parallels, the terrorism thing paralleled my whole career. I seem to be, my writers like to say I had two writers that helped me organize it. And that, I give them props for that. They kept me on the line so that I didn't jump around and confuse the readers. There were so many areas where I was just the Forrest Gump of security, from the time that I was in the security duty office and we had an attack on CIA headquarters in 93 to ending up going against bin Laden's guys in Mogadishu, to all actually working against bin Laden in Khartoum, and then later on in Pakistan. So there was this parallel line of life that just happened. It turned out it worked well for a book.
Yeah, like that. It is a different timeline. It's not like your life. It's more outside events that took you along the way. As you go to these different places, Mogadishu, Khartoum, and all that stuff, are there certain things culturally that you bring with you? Like, do you say Khartoum? I can't think of his name from Godfather, but are there those things that just kind of stick with you as you travel along and you're like, this, has no reference to anybody else here? You
pick up stuff, and there's a lot of language that comes with some of the activities, who you work with. And we call it the Moog, the Moog. And then working in certain parts of Asia, I would pick up terminology. Like I would start to use the language that is local. For example, we say the Bataan Death March, which is a famous World War II death march by the Japanese of the POWs. Well, in the Philippines, they call it Bataan. So you pick up that and you start using, language, and then people in America go, what are you talking about?
Yes.
There's always language. I remember when I talk about the weirdness of the language in the different units, I was detailed to the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office, to be director of security for their largest mission ground station. And I was getting prepared to go out to the site. And somebody said, it'll take you about 6 months for the language. And I said, no, this is a domestic assignment. And he looked at me and he said, it's going to take you 6 months for the language. And he was right. The acronyms were totally different. And I had to recalibrate my head.
Your internal lexicon, right?
That's it.
Yeah, I wish I would have written it down. I had like a paragraph that I could say in all Army speak was all acronyms, and you throw in a couple of hooahs in there and that kind of thing. And anybody in a staff room would understand everything I said, and it would be the most mundane conversation, but it would sound like absolute gibberish if I was to just ramble it off. I should have written it down because it was so good. But, like things like VBID or, all these different things that exist, like that we all just talk fast with it.
Everybody used to call it just a car bomb. Now it's and then if it's a suicide car bomb, it's an SVBIED.
Yes.
What a mouthful.
Yes.
And if they have a vest on, it's an S vest. I mean, it's just
yeah. And then I like to always put like the rocket, like the rockets that they wanted to launch. Like, what if they put that rocket in a car with a person? It's like a rocket propelled SVBID murder bomber.
Oh. Yeah, it gets weirder the more you go into the field, because then people decide that you're going to use radios, right? So now you're going to be on a call sign. Yeah. So next thing you know, you're calling everybody by their call sign.
Right.
And years later, you realize that you don't remember their real first name. So you'll see them in the airport. I remember when Kofor Black, I worked for in Khartoum, and then later on he was the head of CTC, the Counterterrorism Center, and then later on he was with the State Department. It was the ambassador for counterterrorism. He saw me in an airport going to a flight, and he yells out, "Hey, Snake!" which was one of my call signs. Just the craziness of that becomes a lifestyle.
I had a weird call sign thing. So I was artillery in the 90s. I was attached to a unit called 529. I get in a border patrol. My nomenclature is Bravo 529. I become a special agent. My call sign is 529. And because we didn't come up with like fancy like Top Gun names, we were like just literally a number. So that's how we knew everybody by their number. And oh man, you know how much easier it would be if I was like a snake or if I was like the wolfhound or something?
It became very complicated in Baghdad when I was there 04 to 05. We would give people or let them choose a call sign, but we had so many people going through, and we had to keep track of all the call signs and make sure that nobody was using the same one or similar. Like it used to be called, Snake. Snake was taken, so I ended up with Slinger, which was a little personal joke because it means short for gunslinger. But I had people who wanted to have some really nasty names, and one guy kept using the wrong terms, and finally we said, "Hey, you get one more shot." He blew it, and he was Fuzzy Bunny. Oh, he was a protection guy, so he'd come up on the radio, and everybody would howl, "Fuzzy Bunny, Fuzzy Bunny." So yeah,
we had a guy. So I was already on the team, and he showed up, and he was also a Pete. And so everybody in the team is like, "Hey, you can't be Pete. There's too many of you. So you have to be something else. Do you have a nickname?" And he said, "Oh, well, my friends call me Tripod." "Oh, okay. Whip it out. Let's see that fat fucker." And he's like, now your name is Nipple Dick. Because anybody who's really a tripod, and that became his name. He became either Big Gay Walrus or Nipple Dick. Because he didn't understand the rules to the game,
No.
Yeah, I want to get a little bit back into the career thing. 50 different countries. When you got an assignment, how much relief was there if it was a place that you were comfortable with, or that you were like? I mean, you say Bolivia, I think that's pretty good. But you say Mogadishu or Djibouti or Somalia, I think, oh fuck, this is gonna suck. How much of that goes into your? It doesn't matter where you go. Your job is going to be the same. It's just the conditions you have to work in.
Yes, there's differences. Like when I was working on the protection side, we would do usually 6-week deployments because for rotational purposes, and also after about 6 weeks, your performance starts to go down. And what we were able to work at, so we would do 6 weeks, and then we would go back. And we would do a section of training and then some time off, and then you rotate back in. When I was doing the counterterrorism unit, we would do a similar thing, usually about a 6-week deployment. But when I was working in the war zones, in a lot of places, they were 1-year tours, and you would have usually two long 2-week to 3-week breaks during that 1 year. And usually we try to do it at the 4-month mark, because what we've noticed is about the 4-month mark, you start to exhibit some symptoms of stress. And for some people, it actually starts to lead more towards PTS.
Sure.
And that was a major factor for us, especially in my position as the head of security when I was in Iraq and other locations. That was one of the things that I was watching for closely, because different positions, these people would get into some very stressful moments at a regular basis. And that meant that their time in country probably more toward a 3-month break than a 4.
Yeah, that rotational op cycle is really, it's tough. And like you, I did a lot of my work solo. I might be with a unit, but my job was really my work. So if there was operational stuff to do, I had to do it. If there were reports to write, I had to do it. I had to be fit to go out and do the patrol the next day. I had to do all of it. And in the moment, it's fine. You just work really long. A 16-hour day is an easy day, Yeah. But when you do stop, your brain, at least my brain, worked in a totally different way, being keyed up all the time. I ran on caffeine and adrenaline and cortisol. It's taken a long time for me to get reality back,
Well, that's one thing you need to think about too, is the adrenaline factor. I'm having it. We all have it. The three of us had a lot of adrenaline at a certain type of point in our life. And now kind of being in this point where we're kind of doing podcasts and books, and it's a different life. And that's kind of, where do you get that adrenaline back? It's almost like a drug.
Yeah. It's, it was going from 60 miles an hour down, dropping down to 2 and going, whoa, this is a whole different world. Yeah, one of the things I've noticed talking with other people who have similar backgrounds like us is when you retire or you leave the job, it's a huge difference. We are very institutionalized, a lot more so than we would ever believe, and the coming to grips with that and learning to have to deal with that is a struggle, and that's when a lot of times things come out of the closet that we're hiding. And for a lot of us, the delayed stress things come out, and because you're no longer in the job and you don't have to function. So all of a sudden now your subconscious says, well, you're not on a mission now, so I can act up.
Yeah.
And those car washes, you can't go in those anymore.
Yeah.
That's one of the, you still need to find that brotherhood or sisterhood. You need that close contact with people of similar backgrounds. And that's why kind of these I could sure Pete can attest to it. These podcasts and talking to like-minded people is almost therapeutic. Writing a book is therapeutic. Doing this is therapeutic, because, I'm in law enforcement, been in law enforcement almost 20 years now, minus all the military stuff. And, so many cops, when they're done 2 years later, they're suicidal or they're alcoholic or a drug addict, because they kind of lose out. I'm not saying all cops, but a lot of they lose out on their brotherhood and sisterhood. They don't have anybody to connect to.
Yeah. And people who have not had our similar experiences, they really can't relate. I mean, how do you talk about a war zone or a car bomb to people who fireworks at a 4th of July is the loudest bang they've ever heard?
And that's one thing your book touches on, a lot of areas that you've been close to death. How do you go from 60 to 2 miles an hour? I mean, that's one thing. And I'm sorry, I'm bypassing Pete right now, because I love to talk tradecraft too, but I'm always about stress and how we deal with it. So I mean, I look at you guys and I'm like, there's information to be gained here for all of us. Well,
I was always into fitness. And so I became a bit of a gym rat when I could, especially when I'm at headquarters. I feel like I'm the gerbil on the wheel, man. I just hit that wheel harder. But dealing with the stress is a huge factor, especially if you end up doing back-to-backs like I was. I hit every war zone from 93 on until 2013. And you hit something in the head. I finally realized I didn't know how many cat lives I had left.
Right.
And I got to the point where risk-taking was not, I became I was in jobs where I had to be more conservative, and I was more responsible for other people. So I had to be more cognizant of risk and doing everything I could to do more on risk management.
Yeah. That risk thing, man, that resonates with me like crazy, because gosh, if 9 lives is the number and that's the joke, double that, right? I mean, so I've been hit by a tank.
Whoa.
You're not supposed to survive getting hit by a tank. That tank hit a car behind us. It was just hitting cars. So you have a tank out, and these are our people on our camp.
Oh, yeah.
Mortars. I was running one day in Iraq, and the assholes shot an empty mortar shell or a rocket or something, and I'm just running down the road. I didn't run a whole lot because of these kinds of things, but that shell just went dink, 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 dink down the street by me, and I'm like, what a bunch of fucking dicks. They're just doing that. Like, that could have hit me, assholes,
Yeah.
Those things stack up, and like I remember the last time someone truly tried to kill a patrol that I was on. I happened to not be on that patrol, but the bomb, what was left of it, came back because it had blown up, and it blew up the chief of police in Afghanistan where I was. And I just looked, and like, there's motorcycle engine parts in this thing, and I'm like, man, I really got to find a better line of work. Yeah,
there comes a point where you look at it and you go, and there's ways of looking at it. I like to look at it as there's other things I can do. I got more and more involved in training and trying to get our security personnel better prepared for the war zones, because we turned into an organization that was living in the war zones. I mean, we've been in them for how many a decade. That was one of the things that helped me. But then I realized at a certain point that it was time to do something different, and that took some real thought. But I said, okay, it's time to do something drastically different, and I'm leaving. So I left at 50. I got out early. While I miss it, I miss the guys, I miss the mission. I miss being on a mission, but I don't miss the stress. I don't miss the near misses.
Well, it's a lessons learned factor, Now you could use your 20-something, 30, 24 years worth of experience and give that back. And like I was saying before, is like your book is shining a light on something nobody knows about. The only thing I know about protection ops for the agency was what I learned in 13 hours. I don't know about the actual bona fide government employees that went on later on to, mentor and train contractors and everything, but that we need to know this stuff. You are a living historian. So, I mean, that's your next mission. That's the way
I was lucky that I was a pack rat and I collected, and I was really interested. And so when I left in 2013, I gave all my records back to the unit, but there wasn't anybody who had the continuity that I had. And 13 hours was the reason why I wrote the book, because the guys that wrote that were contractors, and they didn't understand the history. They thought it started after 9/11, and we had actually started the genesis was 1990. So I wanted to kind of get that story out, and also there were a lot of people who did a lot of work in a lot of dangerous places, and they got no credit. I mean, nobody knew that they worked it, and I thought there's a lot of people who would love to have this story come out. So this one's for the guys. We had a couple ladies in there, but it was mostly guys working, and it was all staff up until basically 9/11.
Well, you bring up a few good points there, is because the historian. Now, I was attached to Special Ops Command when I was in Iraq in 2006, and there was a historian that came around, and I'm like, what does this guy want? I'm like, what does he care what I do? And then one of my friends was a historian for the Air Force. So I'm like, you know what? You need a record. You need a bona fide record. You can't trust the media or some other narrative. You need someone that's just going to gather facts and become a bona fide historian. So that's why I really dig your book. Big fan. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, that book is called Guardian, Life in the Crosshairs of the CIA War on Terror by Tom Pecora. If you can definitely connect with Tom on LinkedIn. He's got a website coming. Tom, what's your website address?
It's samus-pecora.org.
Okay. Jason said these stories are important because I want to get into the 13 hours thing, but we just don't have time left in this episode because that is such an important story. And when you look at, like, you're often out as a solo guy, right? And I'm positive that job is billeted for more than one person. But there are too many jobs in too many places for not enough people. And so you have to, sometimes the government has to hire in temporary capacity. So you get like the guys from 13 hours, and only certain guys can do that job. I mean, there's plenty of intel jobs where you can sit in your chair and do nothing all day and everybody's stoked. But in a job like that, in a place where most of the world, nothing happened on that day, but in that one place, it did happen. That could have happened in any number of other countries on that day. You just
Absolutely.
don't know. You can't account for all of it. So when we're rough on President Obama and Secretary Clinton, understand that. You tell me, Tom, there is no way to cover all of those shortfalls. There's just not, and unfortunately, folks like us that go out and do hard things in hard places, sometimes it's just the numbers are not in line with you that day, and you pay the price.
One of the things that we tell the new protections officers is that there's only one way to get out of this basically blameless, and that's for it not to happen on your watch.
Yeah.
And that's the only realistic way. And when something happens, you've got to have in the back of your head, that they're going to Monday morning quarterback and things probably not going to look good, but you've got to be confident enough in what you did. And it's a roll of the dice.
Yeah. Well, shoot, man, I appreciate you coming on. I would love to have you come back on and talk more about this stuff. I definitely want to get a copy of the book and read that. Everybody should definitely buy it. And look, here's the deal. When you buy the books on Amazon, buy the book and spend 30 seconds rating and reviewing it. Give him 5 stars. Give him a review, because that's going to allow people to find Tom's fantastic book. I've not read it, and I'm going to tell you right now, on the strength of this guy's pedigree, this is a book you're going to enjoy. Jason is reading it. He's loving it. Buy this book, and you're going to be like, I never knew these things about how we do these things overseas. And then we'll have Tom come back on, and we'll ask him a bunch more questions about it. But Tom, seriously, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for coming on Mark's show and Jason's show, and just thank you for all the things you've done for this country. Because in case you didn't know, that shit ain't easy, man. You did a lot of hard stuff.
Oh, it's more of a vocation than a job. But I appreciate it, and you guys with your background, and the service you did for the country, I appreciate it. And thanks for being podcast hosts. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. That's great.